Ever since Disney bought Lucasfilm and put in Kathleen Kennedy as the president of Lucasfilm, the Force's female edict has been the driving force in Star Wars. In fact, what have we had? 5 movies, right? We've had the 3 sequel trilogy movies. We had Solo as well as Rogue One, all hit theaters. 4 of those were driven by female-led stories, female leads in them. The only one that wasn't was Solo. Obviously, that was a prequel to the Han Solo story that nobody really wanted and wasn't very successful. And certainly if you watch Ahsoka, it's a girl power show. If you watch The Acolyte, it's a girl power show. And one very depressed Asian Jedi that is doing the best he can with not very good work. But there's certainly been lots of female heroes prevalent, whether they be Jedi, whether they be rebel fighters, whether they be this or that, Force users, all that kind of stuff. Forgotten Jedi, people that gave up the thing. The female lead characters have been very prevalent because I believe in Kathleen Kennedy's mind and likely Disney's mind, Star Wars, while an enormous audience when they bought it, what was it, $4.5 billion? What an enormous amount of money to put down for a movie franchise that also had very, very lucrative toy sales. But what would be better than the Star Wars audience than if we doubled it and turned it into a female audience as well? And it feels like they've been going down that path and learning the entire way that none of this is successful. Because when Star Wars kicked off and became popular in the late 70s and early 80s, and certainly had that revival during the 90s when we had the prequel trilogy and all that stuff into the early 2000s, the median age for Star Wars fans tend to be a little bit older and certainly tend to be a lot more male and have continued on that path. And there are lots of demographics and anecdotes and all that stuff that are out there that proved this case. In fact, there was an article recently on The Wrap putting all this information out that you probably didn't need to pay for this because it was basically just common sense. At a high level, the audience for the Star Wars and Marvel franchises are both male skewing. Only a handful of Marvel titles had a more female skewing audience. Between the two franchises, Star Wars is more male dominated, with many titles having a 70% or greater male share of audience. It also has an older audience than Marvel franchise, in part due to the audience demographics of the original trilogy. Over 60% of the audience for each of these films is over the age of 30. So looking at that information in that chart, no surprises at all. No spoilers whatsoever. Shockingly, Star Wars, a science fiction, space, fantasy type setting and story that's been told out and fleshed out over the years, is more male skewing, and a superhero universe is more male skewing. I don't think anybody would have been shocked with that. And certainly the audience age for Star Wars makes a whole lot of sense because I'm in my mid-40s. I grew up with Star Wars literally my entire life. I couldn't have been more excited about the prequel trilogy when it came out. And I was even really excited for the sequel trilogy because at that point, I still remember when Disney bought Lucasfilm. I was like, man, this is going to be great. You know, they really took something with Marvel that had a lot of potential but hadn't been achieved or even close to achieve at that point, and they made it into something special. They can take something that's already special and perhaps make it more special. And boy, do I feel naive for ever feeling positive or excited about Disney Star Wars. But there is plenty of evidence out there. And even when you look at that chart, the most female skewing program that Star Wars has ever put out that had the highest, or I guess the most equal demographics, which is still highly skewing towards males, is still Star Wars. You know, the original movie, renamed A New Hope, you know, in the 90s or whatever, because that's the best movie and that's the most exciting one. All this stuff, all this work that they put in to try and make Jyn Erso and Rey Skywalker and Ahsoka and May and Osha at this point and Bo-Katan and all these characters, where they've gone so hard in the paint going, if we just put female heroes or female characters into Star Wars, the female fans will come. It isn't true. Isn't true by a long shot, because the setting itself and the stories that are appropriate to be told in Star Wars tend to be action-oriented, tend to have lots of lore and world building and different elements that just quite frankly appeal more to a male audience. When you're talking about fantasy elements of magic and good versus evil, and the light side of the Force versus the dark side of the Force, the Sith versus the Jedi, those are all things that now and previously and likely to the end of time will always appeal more to a male audience than a female audience. And there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is Disney, once they acquired Lucasfilm, wishes that they didn't get the audience. Because for a long time, Disney have been the princess franchises, right? Not even franchises, but they are the home of princesses. And they are very comfortable with that female audience. I don't think they're comfortable with a male skewing audience. And I don't think they were comfortable with Marvel right from the beginning. Even when it was popular and it was making all that money, they're like, oh, yeah, but it's like 65% men. What is wrong with that? How do we get it completely equal? We want equity. And the best thing they could come up with, well, let's throw a bunch of girl stuff in there, churn a bunch of the male audience off. Hopefully they'll leave and the numbers leaving out. And it just turns out once you start messing up the formula and the basic concepts of the stories to, I don't know, attract an audience that was never interested in the first place, you actually drive off everybody. I think that's certainly what they've been learning with Star Wars, whose star is faded to such a degree under Disney. Like it's really, it seems impossible what they've actually been able to achieve, but they've had numbers like this, and they've certainly known that Star Wars is a male brand, and they certainly know that Marvel is a male brand. And sure, there are a couple of outliers specifically with Marvel, but there are literally no outliers with Star Wars. And that's just the way it is. And for some reason, they're holding it against the audience, and they'll never go back to really what the bread and butter of Star Wars is, good versus evil. And that doesn't mean it has to be led by a male or any of that stuff. It just has to be good. I think that's the biggest problem, is once you start breaking the mold and trying to expand that audience, you stop telling good stories in the process because you want to cater to everybody. Well, we got to do something for the original audience, so we'll throw a couple things in there, but we got to do lots of stuff for this new audience, so we'll throw a bunch of that in here. And hell, let's throw some other stuff for an audience that we don't even know we want, and you just end up with this, I don't know, a stew of just awful science fiction movies. That's what Star Wars is today. 3 Marvel series have been successful at breaking through with female audiences: Marvel's Agent Carter, Marvel's Jessica Jones, and Loki. Agent Carter in particular, with its strong female lead and blending of the superhero and historical drama genres, has won over female viewers who make up over 60% of the show's audience. Making inroads with female audiences is not as formulaic as simply casting a female lead, however. If you look at the Star Wars franchise, The Mandalorian has had the most success expanding beyond the franchise's male-dominated fan base, rather than Ahsoka, for example. Conversely, in the Marvel universe, Echo has a female lead, but one of the most male-skewing audiences, period, with over 80% males. And you look at the 3 programs that they mentioned there: Marvel's Agent Carter, Marvel's Jessica Jones, obviously on Netflix, and then also Loki, which is on Disney+. When did those 3 programs come out? When the Marvel universe was as hot as can be. When we had the Captain America movies and the first really big Avengers success, and they're like, let's do Agent Carter. Not really a superhero show. Superhero elements to it, but mostly it's a spy show starring a really likable, super attractive female lead. Shockingly, that got over with female audiences. Turns out they kind of like attractive women that are likable actually leading the show there. And guess what? Haley Atwell was actually allowed to have some range. She wasn't just stoic. She was allowed to fail. She was allowed to get upset. She was allowed to win, lose, and all that kind of stuff. And we got a hero's journey. It turned out it was something that appealed even more so to a female audience. And we got 2 seasons of it, and it was very, very successful. But it happened when the Marvel universe was very, very hot. Marvel's Jessica Jones, not technically associated with the MCU, happening on Netflix, but also that Daredevil universe on Netflix, Defenders, whatever you want to call it, was the talk of the town. It was what everyone was talking about at the water cooler, and certainly it had the Marvel name to it. You had the MCU, which was hot as can be, and they made a show with a female lead that really wasn't a superhero show again. She's basically just a private eye, a detective show. Certainly is appealing to females, and while I don't particularly like that character, I really do like the lead actress. I think she's really, really good. I just think Jessica Jones is a really flawed, marred character that I don't even know why Brian Michael Bendis made her quite that flawed. I think flawed heroes are good, but once you make them like promiscuous alcoholics, you might be going over the line with that one. But it did happen when Marvel was as hot as could be. It certainly happened within a shared TV universe that was growing really, really big, and we had the Defenders coming up and all that kind of stuff. So it was very, very popular. When you look at Loki, when did Loki come out? Not at the height of the MCU popularity. It was certainly a couple of years, maybe a year and a half after Endgame, but you still had Spider-Man No Way Home, which was another almost $2 billion movie that was very, very successful. I don't think people realized just how bad the MCU was going to fall at that point once it got onto Disney+. So the MCU, while not the hottest thing in the world, was still very, very, very hot at the time. So people went out there and watched Loki. You've got Tom Hiddleston in the lead role, super duper charming, super duper good looking guy. I think a lot of female audiences like Loki to begin with. You know, certainly introduced within the Thor movie, big player in Avengers and all those movies and all that kind of stuff. Certainly a big known property, big name character at that point, and it was really, really popular. I don't think this is like news to people. Women do like male-dominated program just in general, but they certainly like it more when it's really, really popular. And it's the most hottest thing in the world, and it's what their boyfriends and their husbands and their kids and everything are talking about. They want to be a part of the conversation. They go check it out, and they realize it's really good, and they stick around for a while. But you had 3 instances there where you kind of deviated from the superhero genre for the most part. Agent Carter, not really a superhero show, more of a spy show. Jessica Jones, not really a superhero show, some elements to it, but really more of like a PI investigative type of thing, serial type show. And Loki itself, while certainly having elements of that, was more like magical realms and stuff like that. So, you know, there were some flavors in there that, while they were certainly connected into the MCU and things that have been introduced there, were a little bit outside of your traditional superheroes. It wasn't Iron Man. It's not Captain America or some of those types of things like that. It's not Spider-Man, but it's associated with it. And I do think there's an audience for that, and you can make programs associated with Star Wars or Marvel or whatever that appeal more to a female audience without driving everybody off. But once you start taking the core concepts and the key players and the flagship things that are supposed to be driving Star Wars and driving the MCU and decide they need to be female programs because we need some equity in there, that's when your real folly happens, and that's when you start driving off your entire audience. You know, and you got shows like Echo, like, well, there's a female in the lead. Females didn't care about it because it's a bad show, and guess what? Marvel ain't hot right now. Well, Ahsoka, you know, there's like 4 female leads in this one. It should be very popular with women. They like The Mandalorian more. I wonder why. It's Star Wars, but it's more like a Western. Plus, you got Baby Yoda, who's totally adorable. And The Mandalorian's a pretty cool character, got really good designs. And everybody's talking about The Mandalorian. Remember, they were saying it's the first good Star Wars thing that Disney Plus, or I guess Disney in general, really has made. While me personally, I still maintain Rogue One is a good movie. And I don't think The Mandalorian's a very good TV show. It's basically just a video game. You go and you fight a boss, you get some armor. You go and fight a boss, you get some upgraded armor and all that kind of stuff. And then you fight a final boss. It's basically just a video game played out, as a TV show. I wasn't even going to really watch Mandalorian season 2 until I realized Luke came back at the end to get Baby Yoda. So I literally watched the entire season just for that moment. And I didn't watch season 3 because I was not that interested at that point, because I don't think the Mandalorian's all that great. And I love Westerns, but it just doesn't really work for me. But there's an audience out there. You actually don't have to drive your entire male audience off trying to go out there and court and find new female fans for Marvel and Star Wars and all that stuff. But the dumbest thing that you can do is actually drive off all of your fans while you're trying to make something into a girl's brand, which is going to go down as one of the biggest financial disasters in the history of entertainment. Disney shouldn't be having to write off so many losses. Now, certainly, Star Wars isn't all of that, but it's a lot of that. You know, they try to make the hotel. That didn't work. They've tried to integrate Star Wars into the Disney brand and make it one of the flagship programs out there, not only in Disney Plus and movies, but certainly in feature attractions, theme parks and stuff like that. But them destroying the brand basically destroyed any interest in it and the amount of money you could make with it. They don't even sell Star Wars toys really anymore. I was talking to Aaron. He said he went out to a trade show within the last month or so, and he was trying to sell off some of his original trilogy toy stuff, stuff associated with Darth Vader, with Luke. He said that stuff's not even selling. It's just like Stormtroopers, were the only thing really a lot of people were interested in, at least at that trade show. And there's been an enormous decline in sales and just interest in Star Wars in general because they ended up alienating their audience and letting them know that they never wanted them to begin with. They acquired Star Wars to turn it into a princess brand. Like, I still don't get it. We have also seen this play out with the latest extension of the Mad Max franchise, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. While the expectation might have been that a movie focused on Furiosa's character, originated in Fury Road by Charlize Theron, would appeal more to female audiences, this movie actually had a more male-skewing audience than the previous movie in the franchise. You know, Furiosa is confusing to me. Like, I don't even know what to think about the movie. So my wife has never really seen any of the Mad Max trilogy to begin with. Like, she hadn't seen Mad Max, she hadn't seen Road Warrior, she hadn't seen Beyond Thunderdome, like any of those movies. I wanted to see Furiosa because we were going to be on vacation, and I didn't want to see the Garfield movie. And I asked her if we could go check it out. She went and watched Fury Road, and she fucking loved it. And she wanted to go out and see Furiosa. And Furiosa Mad Max Saga is not a bad movie, but it's not a good movie either. Like, it's weird. Like, the reason Fury Road is awesome is because it's this undeniable force of nature. Like, once it hits the gas, it never stops. There are a couple of scenes where they stop and talk for a minute, but for the most part, it's like 2 hours of badass road chase with dudes hanging by like rubber bands playing guitars and flames and guys coming out of nowhere with the war boys and all that kind of stuff. Furiosa is not that. It's got that, like, for a minute, maybe. Like, there's a couple scenes that were cool, but I don't know. It was like really strangely made. Like, the pacing was really, really odd. And then you're dealing with like the same world that you'd already like developed in Fury Road, and you'd seen the death of a lot of the characters that you were seeing in Furiosa. And they'd already kind of fleshed out what made them weird and disgusting and interesting and all that stuff. And they're just kind of there, just so you know that you're still in the same place but 20 years earlier. So, I don't know. Why would anyone think a Mad Max movie would skew female, even if it was starring Charlize Theron as Furiosa, or in this case, Anya Taylor-Joy? She had a really weird role. I bet she only had 15 lines of dialogue in the entire movie. I'm not joking either. Like, she's not in it, and then all of a sudden she's there, and then she doesn't speak, but like a couple times. Not that Mad Max had the most dialogue in the world in Fury Road. In fact, I would imagine Furiosa had much more dialogue than he did. But that was weird. That wasn't really even a Mad Max movie, but it was so cool it didn't matter. Whereas Furiosa, Mad Max Saga, certainly not a, like, why would women go to see that movie? There's just so much murder and mayhem and death and destruction. Unless your fella is taking his best gal to the movie, what's the point of going? It's like, shit like that just doesn't most of the time attract a female audience. You know, it's just different. It's totally made for males. You know, I bet if you go look at Atomic Blonde, also starring Charlize Theron as like a female, I think she's a spy that basically gets her ass kicked but overcomes in the end. I bet you that was more male skewing. If you go see the Alien franchises, which have all been led by females, like every single one of them, I would be shocked if any of them skewed more towards a female audience than a male audience, because it's sci-fi and fucking horror. Like, that's the thing that they don't understand. Like, there are certain genres that really do focus to one demographic when it comes to genders. And now certainly there are other things out there like horror and stuff that basically are kind of equal when it comes to appeal and stuff. But, you know, stop trying to make badass action flicks chick flicks, and stop trying to make chick flicks into badass action flicks, which they haven't really done. Because you just get this weird amalgamation of really bad movie stew, and it never works out in the end. And certainly it's cost Disney so much money when it comes to value, just as far as Lucasfilm. You know, they paid, what, like $4.5 billion for it? How much do you think Apple would pay for Star Wars today? Outright, just to get the movies, any TV shows, will gain control of all the extended universe and all that kind of stuff, and the toys. Would they even pay $2 billion? Have they decreased the value by over half? I bet you they have. It's absolutely insane what they were able to actually accomplish, which seemed at one point like it was like it couldn't be done. But they certainly did it by driving off their audience, not realizing who their demographics were, and not appreciating their audience, which is never a good idea. If you would like more Star Wars conversations and content and all that kind of stuff, we do cover it here on Thinking Critical YouTube, but we certainly cover it way more in depth on Thinking Critical Patreon, where we focus more on pop culture stuff, especially with the Geek Fix podcast with Aaron Sparrow. If you like more of his thoughts on Star Wars and other stuff like that, there's a link in the video description, and we do right now have a free trial for a week, depending on the tier you want to check out. Definitely go check it out, and I hope to see you there real soon.